Hello and welcome to Books and Beyond. My name is Jimmy Bennett. I'm your host. Books and Beyond, the goal of my show is to help creative people personify their aspirations. In the middle of this pandemic, obviously we can't get into the studio, so we've been doing our shows by Zoom. But I want to thank SEC TV and Frank for all their hard work, who puts this all together for us. And it does still gives us a chance to show our stuff. I appreciate that very much. I have a couple of announcements to make. One is I am co-chairperson of the Southeastern Connecticut chapter of the Connecticut Authors and Publishers Association. This month we had our Zoom meeting. We had a contest, a writing contest, and I want to shout out to Greg Gilmartin, our winner, and Jane DeRocher, our first runner-up, and Karen Sheffield, our second runner-up. And this month we have another contest going. We'll be coming up in our next meeting, and that's a children's book. And even if you don't write children's books, it's a good exercise for you, and it gives you a chance to try to keep your creativity going. I hope you'll all tune in and check us out. And the other thing is next month, I believe it's July 19th, I'll be speaking at the Southwestern chapter of the Connecticut Authors and Publishers Association. They were very gracious and asked me to speak for their meeting. So we'll see. I hope people will tune in and check that out. Now I'd like to get on to my guest. My guest today is Larry Zaccaro. Larry was a research biologist at Pfizer's for 15 years. He is an officer and a member of the Mystic Aquarium Toastmasters, and he's the owner of the Mystic Creative Products Company. But I'm going to let you hear from Larry himself. Larry, how are you? How you doing?
Great, Jim. Thanks a lot for having me on today. Hope you're doing well.
Good.
So that is true. I worked at Pfizer for a long time, and after my career there, I started my own company called Mystic Creative Products. Now, I don't have a brick and mortar store, but what it basically is, it's a chance for me to do all kinds of different creative ideas, develop creative ideas that come into my head. So it's led to several books and other things that I have developed over the years. And I can talk about those briefly, if that's okay.
I'd love it.
The first thing you'll see showing up on screen in a minute is the game I invented called Wordplay. Now, Wordplay actually is a card game, educational, family game. It's a fun game. Think of Scrabble and Gin Rummy combined, where you have 7 cards in your hand, and each turn you lay down cards to make words and get points for it. So it's like playing Scrabble, but with cards. Keep a running total of points, and the person with the most points at the end of the round wins. So that actually has been popular at educational conferences that I attend and speak at. And also it's available on Amazon and for me directly. So Wordplay.
I want to point out too, I've seen this game. I played it a little bit. I think it's a fantastic game. It's a great educational tool. A lot of people are homeschooling their kids now, and there's distance learning, so kids are home. It's kind of a fun way in this pandemic to do something with your family that will help everybody's vocabulary and general literacy. So I think that's a great thing.
Actually, that's a great point, Jim. Thanks. And I'll point out this. I'll keep it on camera. And so here's the game. See, it says Wordplay. When you turn it upside down, it says Wordplay again. So that's called an ambigram. That's my own design. And unfortunately, I was scheduled to go to some more educational conferences, and they all got canceled because of the pandemic. So my sales were cut back. But if anyone is interested, send me an email, which will show up at the end of the show, and I'll work with getting them to you. Looks like we're going to be close to home for a while yet throughout the summer. So
yes,
even in Connecticut, where we're all doing very well. Another product I've written, and you'll see the front cover here, is the children's book, Amy and the Orca. Now, there's a bit of a backstory to this I'll touch on briefly, where a long time ago, I was with my family. All my kids were fairly young at the time. My oldest daughter was in high school. We went on an orca watching trip off the coast of Washington State. On the boat, Lauren, my oldest daughter, had brought her flute with her and played her flute while we were on the boat. And it was kind of a staggering moment when we saw two female orcas swimming along. And as they got closer to the boat, it was very clear that as they approached, they were slowing down with each breath as they broke the surface. They went slower and slower and paused longer and longer. And right when they got close to the boat, they stopped dead in the water and sang back to her flute playing. So it was really a very kind of a profound, almost magical moment. So just recently, 2 years ago, we had the idea to make that into a children's book. Now, I dramatized it a bit, made the girl younger, and hired a wonderful artist, Ariel Friesner, who drew the pictures. And I think you can see the cover now, or you saw it before, where the little girl, no one really likes her flute playing. So she's playing out by the ocean, and one of the orcas hears it, stops, and does the same thing, sings back to her, and creates a magical moment and a friendship between the girl, who's named Amy, and the orca and the orca pod. So that's actually out and available on Amazon as well. So it's based on a true story, but I think it's a little bit of a magical situation that anyone would appreciate and enjoy. So,
I really admire that. Number one, it's a fantastic story. I mean, it's almost mind-boggling when you think about it. But the other part I like about that, Larry, is that it's part of your family lore. And now you have this book, and it can be passed down through the generations, and it's what more people should try to do.
Thank you. Yeah, it really is, Jim. There is quite a bit of emotional at stake in that story itself, and a couple of events in the same week sort of prompted me internal inspiration. One, unfortunately, my mother passed away right at the end of 2017. She lived a long, full life. I mean, it was sad, of course, but then the next week, the flute player of the Moody Blues, Ray Thomas is his name, also passed away. And it's a singing group that I've loved my entire life, really, for 50 years. And the combination of those two events, I worked in that his flute playing was what inspired the little girl to play the flute. And I worked that into the story, that she heard one of their songs and his flute playing. So it sort of was a silent homage to him and to their music as well. So I tend to find that some of my most creative moments are at highly emotional points in my life. And clearly my mother passing away was one of those moments, and things kind of grow out of that emotion for me. I think that's a very common thing for artists and writers.
Right.
And which is very true of my novel that has just been released called Convergent. And it's been the story and the details in that novel have been a long time coming and building. And Jim, you and I have talked about that a bit, but if I can tell you a little bit of the backstory of that, I think you can see the cover of Convergent now. This is just the front cover. Again, I had a concept for a cover in mind, and I have got a local artist named Patrick Regan who designed that based on my horrible pencil sketch and some concepts I wanted. And he turned it into this beautiful work of art that you see on the cover. But the story itself, really, the ideas that are in it started in my head over 40 years ago. And they're really, they've evolved through the years, through the decades, really. And the story itself has two figures, two men One is a contemporary science teacher, and one is a familiar biblical figure. They're both throughout the story talking about the same ideas of the true nature of God, what the nature of life, and what love is, and how to best express it. And throughout the story, you realize that the title Convergent is these are actually converging stories. They converge right into the same story at the end through a science fiction technique, which I won't give too much away, but the science fiction technique works it out so that it is actually the same story, and you realize that it's all been one story all along. But even though it's told as two or even three separate stories. So it's a contemporary thriller. There's a not very nice guy, even a bad guy. There's some drama, some violence. There's even a car chase, as you would see on the back cover. The artist, again, Patrick, did a great job depicting that. But the ideas started a long time ago, and the story became a mechanism that allowed the combination of ancient beliefs and scientific knowledge to be joined into the same idea. They're really the same factual concept. So if it's okay, we can talk about that a little bit, Jim, if that'll work out.
Yeah, I would. I want to point out one thing, and this is just for people out there who's thinking about writing. As Larry pointed out, he had these ideas for 40 years. And your life experiences, your work advisors, everything in your life went into these ideas. And that's the way it is with a lot of us. I'm very surprised to find out that a lot of people begin writing later in life. I didn't really get going until I was in my 50s. But when we're younger, I mean, we have families to raise, we have bills to pay, we have things we got to do. So maybe that's part of it. But I think it's fascinating the way you've put this all together and used all these different aspects of stuff in your life to put this book together. Yes, I would like to talk about this because the biblical figure in your book is very daunting. It's a lot of people wouldn't tackle the subject.
I agree. It was a little bit challenging and almost uncomfortable in some ways to take on. The reader will find there's a lot of familiar scenes that are in the book, in the biblical story, but they are not the same. So what I've basically done is I've given this, all right, it's Jesus. I don't have to beat around the bush. You can tell by looking at the cover.
Yeah.
If he was alive 2,000 years ago, and he had scientific knowledge that we know today, and he was trying to explain it to the people 2,000 years ago, things like DNA and other things that are very important, they wouldn't have the slightest idea what he was talking about. There wouldn't even be words to describe it. So throughout the story, he's trying to explain this, and he is basically frustrated. He's can't really get the full idea explained in the context of where he's living and what he's trying to accomplish in his time. So there's quite a bit of detail that's also discussed, and we can't get into too much of it today, but I can give a little backstory on the ideas if that's okay.
Yes, I'd love that.
So really the bottom line is our existence. The takeaway message is we live in one world. We're always going to live in this one world. Nowhere else. There's not another plane of existence or anywhere else. Think about existence. The universe stretches to infinity in time and space. And here we are in our one little planet in the middle of everything. So the question is, in everyone's mind, did some kind of supreme being or all-encompassing force design that? Well, we may never know that, but what the idea in the story is, we keep our own life. Our life on this planet, each of our lives, is very important. How did life start on this planet? Well, it could, maybe it was chemical evolution, but chances are very high it started right here on this planet. Now think about this a second. If life started somewhere else and came to Earth, the chances of that are infinitesimally smaller than if they started here and evolved the same way, because all the parameters that would require it to form somewhere else would still need to be in place, and then it would have to survive this long journey across space and somehow get to our planet and survive. So it makes a lot more sense that life started here. And a few things: that life is self-aware. Life is the only stuff in the universe that knows it exists, even right down to the cellular level. It replicates itself, it's self-organized, it's self-improving. But a very important thing is it's very complex and yet very specific. There's only a few molecules, we call them nucleotides and proteins, that all life is made of. They're incredibly complex, yet they're very specific. So whether or not that exists anywhere else in the universe is really a very fair question. You think about that. How, if there is life anywhere else in the universe, will it have DNA? Will it have amino acids to make proteins? Every other question is moot. So hope that makes sense. But I think, go ahead, Jim.
No, I was going to say I have heard the theory put forth that life as we know it is such a series of accidents and environment and circumstance that it's almost impossible to reproduce. You know what I mean? It was a very specific set of circumstances with a very specific set of, like you say, chemicals or molecules or whatever. You know what I mean?
Life here, all the resources to create and maintain life are already here, which is why thinking about moving to another planet or anything is absurd, right? We already live in the best possible place in the universe where all life flourishes. We have to take care of it, and that of this planet, that's a very complicated discussion, and that's very much part of the take-home message of that. I want to do a very brief math calculation for everyone to help them understand how special and unique each of our lives is. Now think about your own life, your own conception. All right, you have one sperm and you have one egg from your mother. The chance that that one combination came together, being the nerdy scientist that I am and was, I actually calculated the mathematical chance that you are alive in the first place. All the sperm that your father created, all the eggs that your mother created, and the chance that those came together, each one of us is here on a 1 in 1 quadrillion chance. Those are the odds that we were conceived, each of us, in the first place. Now that's a little mind-boggling.
That's very mind-boggling.
Quadrillion is 15 zeros. All right, and just to put that in perspective, it's hundreds of millions of times less likely than winning Powerball. Right, so each one of us is alive. We're here. We've won the most important lottery that could possibly be in the whole infinity of time and space. We got to be one of the few that got to live, and we're alive right now. So if you start with that, everything else sort of is put in perspective, that we live in this one little planet and we have our 80 years or so of life, and it's amazing to begin with. We don't need to think about any kind of afterlife or multiple lifetimes. The fact of the matter is, any ideas of that, afterlives or multiple lifetimes for a single individual or single spirit, are a direct result of our inability to accept our own mortality. I could say that again. It's a direct result of our inability to accept our own mortality. What a miracle that we're here in the first place. Why do we have to think about living for infinity or, multiple lifetimes? We're here now, and we make the most of that, doing the best that we can for each other. So if we start with that perspective, it's really this very grounded and very profound idea of existence in the first place. So if I could move on and talk about something that's related to that, and really it's the difference between knowledge and belief. So knowledge, actual knowledge, scientific method, rational observation that's verifiable, reproducible by anybody. It's known regardless of the period that we're living in, where we live, what our political or religious priorities are, what study we're following. Knowledge is unwavering, and we accumulate that throughout time. That if we have knowledge, it eliminates so many other things that are big problems, beliefs. And it's a bit controversial, but some of my speeches at Toastmasters, I talk about what I call black and white thinking. People tend to reduce things into one way of thinking or another, when the truth of the matter is the facts are somewhere in between or not related to that at all. An easy example today, it's very controversial and very difficult to think about, is race. Well, nobody is black and white. Nobody is black, nobody is white, all right? Here's white, right? This is a white piece of paper. Look at my skin. It's not even close. We say black and white, but the fact of the matter is everybody is brown and everybody has the same priorities in life. So the main characters in the story talk about that in different contexts, but the whole concept of race is made up. It's just no scientific rationale for it at all. Genetically, we're all 99.6% the same. Everybody has the same skin color, just a different tone. And it doesn't matter where we lived or where our ancestors lived hundreds of years ago. Let's talk about where we're going in the future and where we're going. I mean, the whole idea of, European American or African American, that's all just fashion or made up. It's just really not that important. Another huge example of that is political parties. The black and white thinking, or the differences of thinking of the political parties, are far more important today than doing what's best for the most people. That is, if you have knowledge, all that goes away. We just think about what is real and what is factual, which is, you might want to contrast to belief. Belief we use when we want something to be true that might not necessarily be true. For example, when do we use the word belief? Well, we say, do we believe in ghosts? Do we believe in aliens? Do we believe in Santa Claus? And do we believe in God? I mean, really, if God is a real thing, why in the world do we put God in the same realm as ghosts and aliens, and not with some kind of factual knowledge? Well, the answer is, we do that because we don't know what God is. Well, I'm going to present an idea now that it's a factual representation of what God is. And if anyone has any alternative facts, not beliefs, facts, I'm happy to hear them. Well, the concept of a God is kind of absurd, that there's a force, like in Star Wars, or a being that's created the entire universe. Stars, galaxies, one being has done that. But in the whole history of mankind, every culture has come up with some version of that independently. Why? It's an absurd idea. So why do they come up with this idea? Well, there's something factual and very tangible about it. We live in one real world. So the idea of God and science has to be a compatible, factual thing if God is real. No belief involved. One parameter I would say God has to have is he or she or it has to be self-aware, has to know that it exists and have some kind of targeted activity. Think about the sun or lightning. Two examples. Does a self-aware being actually control or create those? Well, I would say no, and I would say all that matters about what God is. And in fact, I will say God is life. And I'll just give you a quick Biology 101 to explain this if you don't mind. And I'll hold up a couple of cards. But what we are made of, our nature, what we are made in the image of is DNA. Those are our genes. That is what we are made of. The code of life says specific proteins are made in the exact code from DNA, in the exact image of DNA. So here's this. I know we're running out of time, but I'll show you this. DNA, RNA, proteins are made in the image of the DNA. That's not debatable. No one would argue with that. But I'll say, maybe as a closing thought, if we're running out of time, if you remember one thing, DNA is God the Father. It's what we are made in the image of. It is the source of everything we are. And I can't see my face. The information in DNA is transcribed into RNA. And we call that the Holy Spirit. Takes the information away from the genes out into a tangible form that it can be used by our cells to make us. That makes a protein. So we are literally made in the image of our genes. Okay, really can't argue with that. So the only question is, on our conception, that process gets going, makes trillions of copies of our genes. That's who we are. The only question becomes, is that self-contained, or is there some kind of external force that's putting some kind of influence or direction on that? Well, the answer is there's no evidence to suggest there's anything external. That genetic process at conception that divides our cells and maintains us for our 80 years, that's all self-contained. Sure, it uses external things, the resources. It uses water, oxygen, all the things that we know that life requires. But nothing is giving it the direction, telling it what to do. We are self-contained in that way. And it's absolutely breathtaking, the complexity and the elegance that life has. I know we're probably...
Yep. Well, I'll tell you, Larry, I find it fascinating, and it gives you a lot to think about, and especially I think in these times now, with all the problems that we're having with race and diversity, that if people would really understand that we really all are the same, that, you know, it would change a lot of thinking. And, you know, it's going to take time, and it's going to take, you know, a little bit more empathy with people, but I do think it's possible. I think that your ideas are really thought-provoking, and I hope that people will pick up the book, read it, and you know, think about it some more, put some thought into it, and maybe it'll change the way they act and how they are, you know, out in the world.
Yeah.
I want to thank you very much for being on today, Larry.
Thanks
I really appreciate it. I'm going to have to wrap the show up, but I want to just say real quick that you'll be seeing Larry again. We have another special edition of Books and Beyond coming up. There might be a brief hiatus here as SEC TV revamps their studio, but when they're back up and running, we'll be back. And I'm very, very excited about the next show. But until then, this is Books and Beyond. I'm Jimmy Bennett and my guest, Larry Zaccaro. Thank you very much for tuning in, and see you next time.